But viewers at home, exciting times. We do have Razia Mohamed who's joining us this evening, and we are going to be talking about World Autism Awareness Day. Now, Razia is a master at transformational counseling. She is a life coach as well as an NLP practitioner, motivational speaker, and certified substance abuse counselor. Now, today's conversation is centered around, of course, autism, which is a condition that affects millions around the world, and raising awareness to help foster inclusivity, acceptance, and of course empowerment. We join her this evening to discuss this further. Assalamu alaikum, Razia. Thank you so much for joining us on Prime Live. Apologies, viewers at home, but just give us a little bit of time to get through to Razia. Technical difficulties as always. Assalamu alaikum, Razia. Thank you so much for joining us on Prime Live.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's wonderful seeing you again. It's been a while. Thank you for having me on.
Lovely to always chat to you, and of course have the opportunity to pick your brain at some of the most important conversations. Now, we know that we are observing World Autism Day, and what an important conversation this is to have. Can you talk to us about autism as well as the importance of this day and creating a much needed sense of awareness when it comes to autism?
So, the 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 need to promote an understanding and acceptance of people with autism is very dire, right? So it's about encouraging early diagnosis, highlighting the importance of inclusive communities, very much celebrating diversity. And the UN has declared April the 2nd as World Autism Day. So the aim is inclusion and fostering meaningful lives.
I think this is such an important message considering that autism affects millions of people around the world. And when it comes to
100%.
autism, there can be a lot of misconception, there can be a lot of taboo, and a lot of stigma associated with autism as well. But talk to us about the importance of, these kind of myths and misconceptions that we're often exposed to, and the dangers of these myths and conceptions as well.
So generally, autism is viewed in a negative light, right? Because of the aggression, the meltdowns, the hugging impulses. It's generally taken as a source of annoyance. So there are three stigmas, right? So it's stereotypes, prejudice, and general discrimination. And autism is it's not a mental disease. It's not an epidemic, and if there's a misconception that only boys can be autistic, right? Childhood vaccines causes autism. It does not. Also, there's a misconception that bad parenting uh, causes autism. Definitely not. Autism cannot be cured, right? But it can be contained. So we need to realize that these are just people that does not have a disease as per se. It's just a condition that can be contained with the right um, health and wellness professionals, with the right medication, with the right care, and the right positivity interventions.
I think what you've mentioned is so incredibly important when it comes to addressing the misconceptions as well as the taboos and the stigmas that do surround autism in communities and in the world at large. And people often fear an autism diagnosis as well. And I'm glad that you addressed it. And just before logging on to speak to you, we were talking about, of course, the importance of prioritizing female healthcare. And I love that you mentioned there that often it is a misconception that only boys or mostly boys are diagnosed with autism. But autism often presents differently in girls and boys. And that's why it's so important for us to educate ourselves on how they can present, and they can present differently in different people, and what are some of the signs and symptoms, of course, to look out for. But of course, as a life coach, you help families, of course, navigate the difficulties of a diagnosis like this, and also adjusting to the diagnosis, adjusting your lifestyle, making those lifestyle changes. What are some of the tips and tricks that you share with families and caregivers when it comes to navigating this diagnosis, and of course implementing the lifestyle changes that do come with treatment, as well as assistance that might be needed for the person or child who is diagnosed.
So it's very much about teaching parents and caregivers to employ clear, concise language and tones. It's about visual support. That means cards that you know can help them along their journey because it's very much a visual experience. I would say pay attention to body language, to facial expressions, create a calm and peaceful environment. Those are some of the things that are so very, very important in order to foster a positive interaction with the child or the adult that has autism. So it's so much about understanding where they are coming from as opposed to trying to integrate them into your world, right?
Absolutely. Now, something you mentioned earlier on in our conversation, as with any ailment or illness or condition, early
Yes.
diagnosis is key, of course, to treatment and for your overall health and well being. Now, a lot of people, when it comes to autism, are not diagnosed early enough in childhood, and it's often then diagnosed in adulthood. When it comes to particularly the parents out there, what are some of the signs and symptoms that they can look out for within their children and within their family spaces when it comes to an autism diagnosis? Or what are those signs and symptoms that should be ringing those alarm bells to say, let me go and get this checked out and diagnosed?
So when you find a child is doesn't take noise well, cannot integrate in society well, maybe has learning disabilities, or sometimes may be very advanced in their abilities to learning, right? But they prefer to be alone. They prefer to always be in a calming, inducing environment. There are many things that to look out for, right? I would say sometimes emotional intelligence is needed to kind of ascertain that this person is not necessarily abnormal, but they may need different kinds of treatment. So when you what is really normal, right? Because my sense of normal and your sense of normal may be different, but when you're dealing with a child with autism, those are the kind of things to look out for, and early detection is very important. If you get early detection, then also you can contain it basically.
Absolutely. I love what you said there. And that's why I often don't like to use the word disability, because it just means you are differently able. You are differently able and gifted in other ways. And for many people and
Absolutely.
children who are on the autism spectrum, they are incredibly gifted with things like mathematics and science and arithmetic. So they are incredibly gifted in other ways. And something you touched on that often lacks with anyone who is on the spectrum of autism is emotional intelligence. But like you said, this can be fostered and developed and treated, especially when it comes to early diagnosis. Now, as a specialist when it comes to emotional intelligence, fostering and growing emotional intelligence, are you able to tell us about how you're able to develop emotional intelligence that can really help to benefit people that are on the spectrum?
Absolutely. So there are so many ways that we can help foster emotional intelligence with people that are diagnosed with autism, right? So I would say that keeping a journal is so very, very important because you can record their feelings, right? And encouraging them to have a journal, recording the feelings. As we said earlier, the visual cards is so very important because it's kind of like emotion cards. So what they can't express verbally, they can then express through the cards, right? I would say it's about practicing mindfulness or as well. So remember, you can be mindful with a double L, or you can be mindful with a one L. And it's about fostering those kinds of feelings within them so they are able to then be productive and interact with you in a positive way. Also, pay attention to body language, pay attention to the words that they use. encourage self-reflection, mindfulness practices, I think breathing techniques as well. Use clear and concise language. And also, it's so very, very much, very important to express empathy, right? So, to validate their feelings and to make them understand that they are not less, they are just different.
Absolutely. That was very, very powerfully said, and thank you for sharing that. Now, we alluded
Wow.
to this a little earlier in our conversation when it comes to anyone on the spectrum of autism may struggle with anxiety. Are you able to share any coping mechanisms or treatment methods that are very, very useful when it comes to handling anxiety and, of course, identifying anxious driven scenarios or almost curbing anxious attacks or panic attacks, for example?
Yes. So what we need to do is we need to realize that a person affected with autism, um, they need structure, right? And they need to be notified when there is um, no structure or when they are going to be placed into an environment that's going to be different from the norm, because that then can induce different behavior which might not be positive. Okay, so it's about clear expectations, it's about the creation of quiet spaces, it's about preparing changes, as we said, for interaction beforehand. It's about identifying the triggers and then trying to curb those triggers so much so that they can be eliminated. Okay. Then it's about the sensory diet as well. So many people with autism, they can have certain things at certain times, and they kind of have a very limited um, culinary experience also, because that makes them feel more in control. So you can't force onto someone with autism something that other people will eat which they don't like, because it's very much always a sensory experience. And then I would say, like something like, for example, a weighted blanket may create a calming space and a feeling of comfort. So those are the things to be mindful. And I think as a caregiver or a parent rather of an autistic child, you need to do trial and error, very much as with the child that doesn't have autism, but they require more, um, I would say, experience care or expertise in order to do the trial and error to see what works and what doesn't.
Absolutely. Razia, thank you so much for joining us this evening and for sharing your insight. I think having more conversations like this is so important in terms of removing the stigma when it comes to an autism diagnosis, but also more importantly, creating a platform and space for parents and caregivers when it comes to the tips and tricks on what works, what doesn't work, and also just letting them know that there is support out there and there are people and services that are readily available to help them navigate the diagnosis as well. And I think about, removing the stigma when it comes to an autism diagnosis, and I'm immediately reminded of the show called The Good Doctor and looking at this journey of a doctor who is diagnosed with autism but is absolutely brilliant as a surgeon and a doctor. And I think it's all about decolonizing this mindset that we have when it comes to stigma that is associated with autism and recognizing that it is very, very treatable and that there is so much that we can do to create that much needed sense of awareness and support families. But Razia, thank you so much for joining us and thank you so much for your insight. It was lovely to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me. And remember, as I said, they are not different. They are not less. They are just different. So we need to treat them with empathy, love, and kindness. Look forward to chatting you again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam. Viewers at home, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Razia Mohammed, destigmatizing the diagnosis of autism as well as navigating the kind of care and the kind of treatment that is needed for people who are diagnosed with autism and the importance of giving dignity to those who are diagnosed as well. But do engage us and stay engaged with us on our social media platforms to learn more and engage more. But on that note, it is time for us to head over to a very quick ad break and we'll come right back.